Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say, joined by my co-host, Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
It's a lovely afternoon here in Perth, Western Australia. So viewers, plausible or not plausible, episode 187. We have once again been overwhelmed by viewers' questions and comments to Richard's fascinating 17-page report, The Plausible Hypothesis. The viewers have been full of praise for your work, Richard, which with some comments getting more than 100 likes. Over 70,000 views in the last 48 hours, over 1,500 comments and over 5,600 likes. We'll start off with some likes before we get to the not-so-likes. Jinjin4920, thank you for all you do, gentlemen. The world is a better place for your integrity and intelligence. And Reagan LaPrairie 438, this is a Nobel Prize-worthy report, Richard and Geoffrey. And Peter Mason, India 1 Hotel, a most impressive piece of work, technical deduction, interpretation of events that resulted in this tragic accident, and finally, your style of presentation. And Bravo 1 Lima Yankee Bravo, a 35-year airline pilot. Wow, what an awesome analysis. Wish you men were teaching some of my ground schools. Thank you. And Jim Marie 1, if anyone wishes to disagree with you, well-established guys, that's fine by me, as long as they can produce a document as detailed as you have done. I feel that there should be a mandate for an independent international investigation team for the whole of aviation world, and you two should lead it, or at least be part of that team. My credentials, 10 years in the Fleet Air Arm. And Karl-Heinz Kempfer, 1963, I can only confirm what you said, Mr. Thomas, about Mr. Godfrey's analysis, a truly excellent, rock-solid and meticulous analysis. Many greetings to you both from Germany. However, as I mentioned, Richard, there are some folks who do not agree, and Ryan Hock 4169 asks, and I have abbreviated his question, how do you get to the conclusion that the rat deployed before the switches were set to cut off? The preliminary report states the aircraft started rolling at 08:07:37 UTC. As per the EAFR data, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 and achieved 153 knots IAS at 08:08:33 UTC. The VR speed of 155 knots was achieved at 08:08:35 UTC. The aircraft air-ground sensor transitioned to air mode, consistent with liftoff at 08:08:39. The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots IAS at about 08:08:42, and immediately thereafter, the Engine 1, Engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transition from run to cutoff position one after another with a time gap of 1 second. The engine N1, N2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. This says the airplane accelerated to 180 knots, and 3 seconds into the flight, plane going to air mode, the switches were put to a cutoff position. So Richard, can you answer that query, please?
Sure. In our report, we show a timeline in section 18. We have synchronized the FDR data from the preliminary report, as well as the ATC data from the preliminary report, which are given to the nearest second, together with the ADS-B data from Flight Radar 24, which is given to the nearest millisecond, and the timestamp CCTV frame-by-frame analysis, and each frame is given to the nearest 33 milliseconds. In section 4, we lay out the calculation and timing of the acceleration to the maximum airspeed of 180 knots IAS. In section 18, we lay out the timing of the initial climb to the highest altitude recorded, 625 feet above mean sea level at the International Standard Atmosphere, 15 degrees centigrade and 1013.25 HPA. And in section 10, we lay out the timing of the rat deployment sequence, which is what your question is driving at. And what confirms the rat deployment at 080841 UTC is the hard cutoff of the transponder, which is a non-essential electrical item. And that hard cutoff was at 080850.871 UTC, which is 9.871 seconds after rat deployment. And it is exactly the time where the rat starts to supply stable electrical supply to the power distribution system, and the power distribution can switch from the main battery as emergency backup to the rat as the emergency essential electrical supply. So the electrical sequence after liftoff, you note 080839, the weight of off wheels and transition to air mode. 080841, the rat deploys. And from 080841 to 080850.9, the aircraft is powered by the main battery as a standby inverter path as well. And then the rat spins up and the system configures the essential buses. So at 080850.871, which is 9.87 seconds later, the transponder cuts out, matching the moment the electrical system finishes the transition to rat-powered essential buses and the non-essential loads are shed. The transponder drop is a credible marker that the airplane left the battery standby regime and finalized the rat essential bus configuration. And as we stated in episode 185, the rat deployment was due to an electrical fault that occurred 2 seconds after takeoff and 1 second before the maximum recorded airspeed was achieved, 180 knots IAS. The fuel switches were moved to cutoff after that point in time and after the electrical fault and after the maximum airspeed was recorded. The rat deployment does not cause an automatic engine shutdown, but a major electrical fault can cause both a rat deployment and a dual engine shutdown. If engine shutdown was not caused by an electrical fault, but caused by the fuel switches being moved to cutoff, then the maximum recorded airspeed would have been higher than 180 knots, more likely 187 knots, and occurred at least 2 seconds later. Moving the fuel switches to cutoff in the cockpit was, in my view, a deliberate action, plausibly driven by misinterpretation under time stress.
Yep. So there's a comment here from Mike 747436. That, for those who don't know, is a variant of the 747. Another great episode. I have to ask why the 787 hasn't been grounded or rectified if you suspect a technical fault, with the combined expertise of Boeing, GE, NTSB, FAA, UK AARB, and the Indian authorities having looked at this. What's prevented them from coming to the same conclusion? I still believe the answer lies with the CVR recording.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. And we suspect a fault with the Air India maintenance. That is not a design or manufacturing fault of the Boeing 787.
Jonathan Swartz 8 asks, how does your hypothesis explain the cockpit dialogue regarding the turning off of the fuel switches when asked by one pilot and denied by the other?
Well, there are different scenarios, Jonathan. Either the fuel switches were moved accidentally and unknowingly, then neither pilot would know the fuel switches were moved. But somehow I doubt that the spring in each switch had failed or was not properly installed. In one switch, that might be possible, but two switches, I've ruled this scenario out as quite unlikely. The second possibility, the fuel switches were moved unintentionally because of a brain fart, and we've discussed that at length in previous episodes. And then, of course, neither pilot would know the fuel switches were moved. And the third scenario, the fuel switches were moved intentionally because of a misinterpretation of the situation, thinking it was necessary to recycle the switches and force the FADEC to recommence the relight sequence. And then one pilot would ask the other pilot, why did you do that? And I would still like to hear the actual conversation rather than the reported conversation. And what, one pilot might have said WTF and the other pilot said, what, me? No. But I'd like to hear exactly what was said.
From the Hampshire studio, Hampshire 857. You two guys need to make contact with Boeing, Air India, and the NTSB and all the rest as soon as possible to save more innocent people in future flights. Please, guys, do it now. Don't waste all that good work, time, and effort. Well, of course, Boeing's contacted us. And Colin Waters, nonsense. The AAIB and NTSB have access to far more information and more experienced crash investigators. They just don't speculate on the internet. Oh, that's a bit tough. Richard.
Well, yeah, Colin, Boeing have asked for and received a copy of our report. And we have written to the AAIB and the DGCA in India, and they have not bothered to reply. So, we've done what you've suggested, Hampshire Studio.
Trem Doctor 007. I'm not buying it either. I think the rat deployed the moment both fuel switches were set to cut off. Because the engine has a lot of rotating mass and hadn't fully shut off, the rat didn't need 8 seconds to provide full hydraulic power. Same with electrical. Boeing's testing was probably in a wind tunnel or on its own system in flight to simulate engine loss. They wouldn't power off both engines 30,000 feet up to test, would they? I quite understand that. I trust the FDR data if the authors of the report were honest. We are all speculating until we get more data, such as the rat deployment timestamp and the method, automatic or manual, and all 4 channels of the voice recorder for 32 seconds. Richard.
Yeah, well, we'd like that data too, but Boeing have tested dual engine fail out at 30,000 feet, by the way. I would say, Trem Doctor, the major point is we're not selling our report, so no wonder you are not buying it. There is only one concern amongst the over 1,500 comments that stands out. More than 800 viewers asked about the fuel switches. 193 viewers want to know why the fuel switches were moved to cutoff. 184 viewers want to know why the delay of between 9 and 13 seconds to move the fuel switches back to run. And 152 viewers wanted to know who moved the fuel switches. A number of viewers are saying that 9 to 13 seconds to move the fuel switches from cutoff back to run is unacceptably slow. I disagree. The main battery only supports a single engine relight, and the relight sequence takes at least 20 seconds. Only once the rat is fully deployed, after 10 seconds, it then supports dual engine relight. We know one engine was relit successfully, but the second engine took longer. If one engine thrust came online 20 seconds after engine shutdown, the second one would have come online probably after 30 seconds. And we know the flight only lasted 30.715 seconds. We also know the captain stated thrust not achieved. We also know the sole survivor stated, after the takeoff, within a minute, it felt like the plane came to a standstill in the air for 5 to 10 seconds. I could feel engine thrust increasing to go up, but then the aircraft crashed with speed into the building.
Mike Yankee Yankee Yankee. I wonder why the plane is not designed in such a way that a water leak will always be routed to a location where it can't cause damage. It's not as if protection against water ingress involves technologies that aren't already mastered. I fully understand the difficulty when it's an afterthought, but shouldn't that be an important design criterion right from the start?
Well, Mike, it was. The plane is designed that way. However, planes also require regular preventative and corrective maintenance. If our hypothesis is proven, then the event was preventable and points instead to a root cause as a failure in the maintenance oversight and non-compliance with the FAA AD 2025-09-12, which specifically addresses water ingress into the EE bay and the need for improved cabin water sealing. There is a whole raft of measures that are required in order to seal water coming from the cabin through to the EE bay. And there are a series of FAA airworthiness directives and Boeing requirement and service bulletins and alerts, which are mandatory. Water ingress remains an open question until maintenance logs are made public, and the FAA AD 2025-06-18, as well as the reference predecessor document, mandates inspection of moisture protection systems. We lack any public physical forensic confirmation, EE traces, wiring marks, RDC logs to say which electrical path failed and whether water ingress played a role. What I am now interested in is the maintenance logs and that they show compliance with the FAA AD and specifically with the water ingress into the EE bay. I am particularly interested in electrical contactors that are exposed to the air and any moisture leaks or unsealed connectors or insulation faults in the wiring. And the FAA document was issued on the 14th of May 2025. The document references the Boeing Alert Requirement Bulletin, which was issued on the 6th of March 2024, over a year before the accident. And it's time that they came clean and gave us the information.
And we should also mention and remind viewers that the electronics of aircraft, all aircraft, are simply mind-boggling. And behind those panels, under the floor, in the ceiling, all around the aeroplane, all around the passengers, are literally thousands and thousands of kilometres of wiring with systems throughout the entire aircraft. So, these aircraft are incredibly well insulated against water ingress, but every now and again there is a fault, and then Boeing was right onto it in a flash. But the question is, was Air India onto it like a flash? ILAN 6987. The reason why the pilots exceed the runway could be outside heat. The GE engine's flat rate of OAT ratio is 30 degrees C or 86 F. Once the jet is operating at, say, 40 degrees C, it's over 10 degrees off the flat rate. This means the engines reach max temp before said thrust. The FADEC engine control will limit the fuel amount reaching the engines, which reduces turbine rotation. So reducing thrust on takeoff will result in slower acceleration and longer takeoff roll and eventually reduced climb rate. Richard.
I don't agree. And by the way, our calculations were made based on the reported temperature of 37 degrees centigrade at Ahmedabad Airport. And the GE NX-1B engines are designed to operate at this temperature and any other temperature between minus 54 degrees centigrade and plus 54 degrees centigrade OAT during takeoff. So I don't know where you get your information from.
Paul Todd, 3497. Gents, would the air conditioner system fault from the previous flight have anything to do with the water damage to the electronics bay? And secondly, could maintenance carried out from the previous flight cause some damage, misplacing a spanner in the electronics bay?
Yeah, well, there's always a spanner in the works, isn't there? The failure of the air conditioning system when the outside temperature on the ground is 37 or 38 degrees centigrade will, of course, cause the aircraft to heat up inside. And there have been numerous examples of Air India and Air India Express maintenance failures. Air India, Boeing 788 at Bangalore on the 12th of October 2013. 43 screws were found missing when a panel was reattached after maintenance. And Air India Express Boeing 738 at Delhi on the 2nd of September 2024 had engine problems, and it was possibly due to spare parts being dropped inside the engine. Another Boeing 738 at Lucknow on the 8th of March 2014 dropped part of the nose wheel. And another 738 on the 12th of October 2018 impacted a localizer antenna and wall on departure because the captain's seat reclined during departure. And this was found to be a maintenance failure.
Richard, we've received a detailed reply from anonymous Bravo India 4 India Yankee. But I've cut out the timeline part as this mirrors the preliminary report. Here is the text. I'd like to commend Airline News for exploring alternative explanations for Air India 171 accident. Contributions by Airline News team foster a lively and thoughtful technical discussion to raise awareness about challenges faced by the aviation industry. At the same time, based on the data available from the AAIB report, CVR, CCTV and aircraft system records, the sequence of events suggests the RAT deployment was a consequence of dual engine cutoff rather than a pre-cutoff event caused by water ingress in the aft EE bay. Air India has maintained a strong safety record, and the AAIB coordinated with multiple authorities during the preliminary investigation. The information in their report represents the most authoritative data currently available. The timeline documented by the AAIB, corroborated by the CVR, CCTV and aircraft system data, provides a clear record of the sequence of events. Alternative theories suggesting pre-cutoff for the RAT deployment due to aft EE bay water ingress are not supported by the available empirical data. My intention in presenting this analysis is solely to clarify the sequence based on verifiable evidence and to contribute constructively to the discussion on aircraft safety. It sounds like Anonymous works for the AAIB. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, I had the same thought. Um, our report is not an academic exercise, and we present 17 pages of concrete facts and analysis. The preliminary report omits a large amount of data, and we've listed that out in previous episodes and in a letter to the AAIB. There is data available from the FDR and the CVR, and as well as from ADSB and CCTV data, and this available data has not been published. We find the preliminary report is seriously deficient, and we've called out the missing information, and we've still had no reply to our letter posted over 2 weeks ago by email. Your comment, I thought, was offensive and offensive to the safety of the flying public and the victims' families and friends. And we have received emails from victims' families which are very supportive of the work we have done.
Yes, I've been surprised by the number of communications we've had actually. So, yeah, you're right. So, you've also received an apology which read, "My sincere apologies if my comments unintentionally appear to suggest any such meaning or suggestion as perceived by yourself. I have edited it slightly and accordingly to address your concerns. Important to take note that I did not conclude why switches transitioned to off as mentioned in the report. That is still a mystery. Hopefully your team can solve this beyond any doubt. My best wishes for your continued efforts. Thank you."
Well, thank you for the apology, which is accepted, and appreciate the civil dialogue.
So, Capage 1-2, the month ago I wrote to this channel, like in physics, the most beautiful theories or formulas that shine and stand out by their simplicity are the good ones. I believe for a reason we don't know the two engines failed in a very short time, maybe from a common cause, maybe not. We just don't have enough info to find the causes. But if you assume this, all the rest of the scenario becomes beautiful. The pilots are good people, not murderers. They followed the procedures and did their best to save the plane, but had no chance, so low, by trying to restart the engines, and apparently they did do it. This explains the on-off-on switches. It also makes sense of the audio. Something caused the two engines to fail at rotation or just before, most likely the same cause but maybe two different causes. Richard's explanation is of the type most beautiful theories. Great job. That is real scientific investigation.
Oh, many thanks. You're very kind in words you state and express.
So GBAC 18, great work. I only question whether you have eliminated the possibility of a fault driven by the switch to airborne mode, possibly driven by water ingress you have identified.
Yeah, we have actually eliminated a single or dual failure in one or two of the 6 WOW sensors, the weight on wheels sensors, as a cause of the crash. With 6 sensors, you still get, even if 2 have failed, you get a clear voting 4 out of 6. And I really don't think the weight on wheel sensors were the cause of the crash.
Richard, from Shan Tan Up Hale 3966. Although there is freedom to express all and any analysis and questions by all viewers, unless all videos in this analysis by two gentlemen are watched, asking any random questions may lead to unreasonable and or repeated comments, costing the time and effort spent by Mr. Richard for reaching up to this point in their analysis. Possibly many of the viewers who join later in the channel unlikely watched all videos in sequence and keep throwing repeated and or logical unfit questions. There is no substitute to scientific and engineering calculations to reach up to the most reasonable conclusion. Although we do not know yet what's the real cause, we can't reach by letting all questions based on feel. There must be logically fit supporting calculation before countering any type of analysis.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why we laid out that analysis in the 17-page report. And for your information, the majority of commenters do not watch episodes in full. And there are quite a number of commenters who don't watch any episodes, just simply come on the channel to comment and then leave again.
Yeah. And then, Richard, we had a reply which reads, "Thank you for taking out time for responding. I truly admire your work you are both doing, keeping human being at central position. It's a courageous task."
That's
Now,
a lovely, lovely comment. Thank you.
yes, it is. Fayez Ahmed 1281. Good work, Richards and Geoffrey. I request you to email today your preliminary report to Air India, Boeing, AAIB, India, DGCA, NTSB, and Airbus. Yeah.
Well, as Geoffrey said, Boeing have already asked for it and received it, and the AAIB and DGCA in India currently not replying to my formal letters under the ICAO regulations. So if they won't speak to us, I don't think there's much point in sending them yet another email.
So Joanne Jacobs 007. You guys missed an important step to the relight of the engines. On the overhead panel, two rotary switches must be set to the start position before the fuel cutoff switches are placed to the run position.
Sorry, Johan, you're wrong. The rotary switch on the overhead panel is not a switch permanently moved to the start position. There's a spring-loaded switch which you can move to the start position when you're on the ground and starting the engine. That opens the fuel valves. And you don't need that for the FADEC relight sequence if you're airborne. With the FADEC relight sequence functions when the engine start rotary switch is in the norm position. And moving the engine start rotary switch to start is used on the ground or in the air if you have previously shut down one engine manually. It's not required for FADEC relight.
So Huck 1394.5, if you had to play devil's advocate and try to be a skeptic of your own hypothesis, which is the weakest link in your chain of logic and why? I'm referring to information left out of the preliminary report or assumptions you had to take because we are missing some of the facts. Is there one variable that if we knew the answer for a fact that would change or could change the hypothesis or its direction? For example, I'm not sure how trustworthy the timestamps of all the events are. Those could change the narrative quite a bit, couldn't they? Either way, thanks for all the effort. I definitely do not disagree with your hypothesis.
Oh, thank you for that. And yes, you're quite right. The trustworthiness of the timestamps is something we have questioned. But when we synchronized the ADS-B data with the CCTV footage, with the FDR data from the preliminary report, and with the ATC data, it all ties up. So I think the timeline is pretty solid. The one thing I would like to know is whether Air India complied with the FAA AD 2025-0912. issued on the 30th of April 2025, and the Boeing Alert Requirements Bulletin issued on the 6th of March 2024. If they did inspect all of the Boeing 787 aircraft, and in particular the crash aircraft, and found them to be perfectly in order, or they repaired any issues that were not in order, then I think it would start to reduce the likelihood of a water ingress issue. And that would substantially change the hypothesis. So the next key information I'm looking for is information from Air India on the compliance with the FAA, AD, and the Boeing service bulletins.
Now, Richard, a few concluding comments. John Potter, Kilo 8 Romeo. British European Airways, which is now part of British Airways, lost a Vickers Vanguard in 1971 due to corrosion caused by sewage fluid which had collected in the rear near the tail. The corrosion resulted in an explosive decompression, blowing the tailplane off. The Vanguard nosedived into a field with all 63 on board passing away. This accident highlighted the danger of spilt fluid on the structure of an aircraft or its electrical systems. Excellent episode, Richard and Geoffrey. Brett, Juliet 2643, a very cognitive hypothesis, a truly excellent, highly detailed, methodical investigation by two experts conducted over a month. I hope that the Indian air crash investigators are aware of your analysis. Let's have the maintenance logs revealed. Roger Chester, 1638, you have done a wonderful analytical exercise. Congratulations and thank you. I'm sure that you, like me, are wondering why all the flight and aircraft data has not been released. Perhaps 260 lives don't count for very much. And Richard, at last but not least, a humorous insight into water leaks in the cabin. Chris McBrien, a regular viewer, has sent us this email. In 1979, I was returning from Mumbai, to Singapore on Air India after a meeting with the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation. I was seated next to the window and had put my briefcase in front of my feet and under the seat in front of me. About an hour into the flight, I heard a pitter-patter sound like that of water being spilled. I realised that this noise is coming from my briefcase under the seat in front of me. I looked down only to see this liquid was coming through the seat in front and onto my briefcase. I then realised the passenger occupying the seat in front of me was urinating. I grabbed my briefcase and reseated myself towards the rear of the cabin for the rest of the journey. So that's an interesting story.
Yeah. I can imagine the quick retreat to the rear of the cabin for the rest of the journey.
Yeah.
And when I read this, I thought, shit happens, but maybe that's the wrong metaphor to use in this case. And thank goodness it wasn't. Shit happens.
Yeah, some strange and weird things happen on aeroplanes. Absolutely. So, Richard, thank you very much indeed for answering all those questions. Some tough questions there, but interesting questions nonetheless. And hopefully that answers those queries from those viewers and other viewers who have raised the same issues as well. So, viewers, we'll be back tomorrow with more questions, which I'm sure we'll get from this episode. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. And if you don't, please do. We'd love your support. And we love the comments. They're absolutely fabulous. And thank you for the questions. Although some of the questions are tough, we really do like them and we do read them all. I can promise you that. It's an all-day job and we do read them all and we do appreciate them very much. So, Richard, thank you.
You're very welcome.
And viewers, please do tune in tomorrow. We very much look forward to your company. Thank you.